Good morning. This is historian Stephen Ujifusa, and this is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast. It is July 10th, 2024. And this upcoming November, I'm going to be traveling to Germany for the second time this year. This time in November of 2024, I'm going to be speaking at a series of celebrations that commemorate the 125th anniversary of Albert Ballin being appointed the general director of the Hamburg-America Line. That's the equivalent of CEO. And the events will be held by the successor corporation to the Hamburg-America Line, Hapag-Lloyd. Those of you that are anywhere near a trucking area or near anywhere that unloads ships, you will see the Hapag-Lloyd containers. So this company that was founded in the 1840s is still very much around. And it is a true honor to be attending these events and speaking about Albert Ballin in his beloved home city. I will also be attending the launch and christening of Hamburg-America Line / Hapag-Lloyd's newest and largest container ship, the Hamburg Express, during that time in Hamburg in November. And Albert Ballin's life was a truly extraordinary story for any person, and especially in Imperial Germany. Albert Ballin was born in 1857 in Hamburg. Before Germany was unified, Germany did not become the country we know it until 1871. But Albert Ballin's rise mirrored the rise of Germany and also of the German Jewish community, which under German unification in 1871 was, at least on paper and legally, emancipated and given full citizenship rights. And Albert Ballin was born to a poor Jewish family in Hamburg. His father was a failed businessman. But Albert Ballin, who was immensely intelligent, immensely driven, rode the wave of Germany's economic, cultural, industrial growth. And he turned the Hamburg-America Line into the largest shipping company in the world by 1914, when World War I started. And he pioneered such things as the modern pleasure cruise. Before that, ship travel was almost entirely utilitarian. It was he that made ship travel on Hamburg-America Line ships a truly first-class, luxurious experience, where ships became destinations in their own right. And people would take trips to the Caribbean and to the fjords of Scandinavia on Hamburg-America Line ships purely for the fun of it. He pioneered the idea of cross-branding on ships. It was he that had a partnership with the Ritz-Carlton Company to serve specialty food in specialty restaurants where you paid a bit extra, more than a bit extra, to have a menu selected by the famed chef Auguste Escoffier of the Ritz Hotel in London and in Paris. So he was a true visionary. But he also operated under a cloud of fear, despite all of his success. In spite of Germany's Jews being formally emancipated and granted full citizenship rights, anti-Semitism was still very much alive in Germany. In fact, it was growing as World War I approached. Although Jews played extraordinarily large roles in Germany's culture, in business, and in industry, they were not allowed to serve in the foreign service or have high-ranking officer posts in the military. And in Berlin, that's where most of the true government power was consolidated. Kaiser Wilhelm II had a number of Jewish friends. He would have an advisory group of Jewish businessmen come and visit him in his palace from time to time to discuss Jewish affairs within the empire. But those who were especially close to him, the Prussian military establishment, were quite anti-Semitic, most notably his own wife, the Empress Augusta Victoria. Albert Ballin, whenever he visited Berlin, even though he would be the guest of the Kaiser in his palace and was deemed worthy of being presented at court, he always felt that when hanging out with the Prussian aristocracy, that he was seated across the table from anti-Semites. And so he was always walking this tightrope. His closest friend The banker Max Warburg of Hamburg was the leader of Hamburg's German Jewish community. Max Warburg was the head of the bank Warburg and Company, which was one of the most powerful investment banks in Imperial Germany. It was Warburg and Company that financed so much of the Hamburg-America Line's growth during these years. Ballin and Warburg had a private telephone line that connected their offices. They spoke every day. Their correspondence and surviving letters are not just extraordinarily moving, but extraordinarily funny. Albert Ballin always had this inferiority complex of coming from a poor family and working his way up the hard way. Max Warburg, on the other hand, had been born to wealth and felt pretty much supremely confident of his place in German society. History would prove him wrong, sadly, in the years to come, especially after the First World War. On November 8th, 1918, a full-fledged revolution broke out in Germany to protest the end of the war. Albert Ballin, before 1914, had worked vigorously behind the scenes to stop Germany entering a major war. He was terrified of what he saw going on in Berlin, where he felt, as the head of the Hamburg-America Line, he was working for Germany's place as a force for good in the world, a leader of technology, of science and art, culture. And Germany had achieved all those things between its unification in 1871 and the start of World War I in 1914. But behind the scenes, Albert Ballin realized that there was a group of militarists in Berlin who wanted Germany to enter a war. Now, the term Lebensraum was not coined by Adolf Hitler in the 1920s and 1930s. Rather, that was a term used in Imperial Germany to expand the country's quote-unquote living space in the East. And that meant capturing a big chunk of what was then the Russian province of Poland with its fertile farmland. The wealth of the Prussian aristocracy was based almost entirely in large agricultural holdings in Prussia. Many of these holdings were ethnically Polish. And this group had a disproportionate amount of power in Imperial Germany, as opposed to, say, the urban bourgeoisie of Hamburg and Frankfurt. And these two groups, the Prussian aristocracy, which centered around the Kaiser, and the commercial and mercantile elite of Hamburg and of large industrial cities, were very much at odds. And Albert Ballin was very much of the mercantile bourgeoisie. And he was terrified of Germany being involved in a war in which it was forced to fight two fronts: England and France on one side, on the Western Front, and Russia on the Eastern Front. Kaiser Wilhelm II was surrounded by advisors who felt we could do this, and they had laid it all out in something called the Schlieffen Plan, in which basically Germany could fight a two-front war and not find itself crushed. When war broke out in the summer of 1918, Albert Ballin, who had worked vigorously behind the scenes with his friends in England, especially the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill. In fact, Albert Ballin and Winston Churchill, when they found out that war was imminent, the two of them clasped hands, and Winston Churchill told his dear friend Albert Ballin, "My good friend, please let us not go to war." When war started, Albert Ballin found himself formally frozen out of the Kaiser's inner circle. He was derided as a pacifist and Anglophile and called worse things. And the Hamburg-America Line, which he worked so hard to build into the world's largest and wealthiest and most profitable shipping company, with the slogan, "My field is the world," effectively ceased to exist. Most of the company's 175 ships were stuck in American ports on the other side of the Atlantic and basically unable to leave. And then the British Navy laid mines in the North Sea that blockaded Germany and would eventually starve the country into submission. The Kaiser's closest advisors closed ranks around the monarch, and he was not allowed to hear any bad news. Albert Ballin knew what was going to happen. He knew that Germany could not win this war. And because of this sentiment, he lost many, many friends and found himself increasingly alone. And on November 8th, 1918, he found himself working at his office in the Hapag building on the Ulster Lake in Hamburg when an angry mob of revolutionaries, soldiers, sailors, people who had derided him for a long time as a capitalist exploiter, they stormed into his office and threatened his life. Albert Ballin retained absolute composure, told the angry mob that he and his company will work their hardest to feed the starving residents of Hamburg. He then walked home. He found that his house on the Feldbrunnenstrasse had been looted. His wife greeted him at the door, telling him this terrible news. Their beautiful home, which had been nicknamed Little Potsdam because before the war, the Kaiser had made so many visits, was trashed. And his daughter, Irmgard, and her children had fled to their country house outside of the city for safety. This is also the same time that a new variant of influenza called the Spanish flu was ravaging the populations on both sides of the Atlantic. So the city was in absolute chaos. Mobs and rioters were running through the streets calling on the war to end. Albert Ballin went up to his second floor study in his house and took a large dose of sleeping pills. He died the following day. That same day, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated the throne of Germany and fled to Holland. Soon after getting there, he blamed the fall of the German Empire, not on fighting a two-front war, but on the Jews. And this monarch, who had professed to have many Jewish friends, would write soon after his abdication, "The only solution for this betrayal would be an international all-worlds pogrom a la Russe. I believe the best thing would be gas." Germany surrendered on November 11th, 1918, to the Allied powers. The following day, a small group of mourners gathered at Albert Ballin's house, which had been hastily cleaned up, for a memorial service for their dear friend. The person who gave the eulogy was Max Warburg. And Max Warburg's eulogy, he spent a lot of time on this. This was his best friend. And I would like to read you this eulogy that he gave at this terrible time when Germany had surrendered, the country was in chaos, and everything that Max Warburg and Albert Ballin had believed in, the old German monarchy, the Hamburg-America Line, shipping empire, and their own sense of culture and place in the world have been devastated, destroyed. And this is what Max Warburg said in tribute to his dear friend and fellow Jew and fellow German. "The night before the burial of my good friend Albert Ballin, I'd like to try to put the feelings I'm experiencing into words. The pain of his wife, a true companion throughout life, as well as of his daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren, is too sacred for me to discuss. But for all of those who are able to call him a friend, and there are many, it is necessary to say a word of thanks. What was the secret of his personality? The harmonious tone of his voice, his good, firm handshake, his rare gift of being able to connect to everyone, his palpable desire to help, to console, and rarer still, to celebrate in his heart with others. The combination of these seldomly together attributes gave him a power of attraction and produced an atmosphere that no one could escape. He had one more great gift, a robust sense of humor. His memory never failed, and he knew well to tell the many stories he had accumulated in his life. He was a master of German, Plattdeutsch, and English, and knew how to find the right turn and phrase for both serious and jovial topics. Albert Ballin had a powerful nature. His will was powerful, as was his penetrating intelligence, and his heart beat powerfully and warmly. He was a brilliant salesman, blessed with nearly prophetic powers and great fantasy. He was more an artist than an engineer, and more a painter than a draftsman. The richness of qualities with which he was blessed on life's path also generated a great many conflicts within him, through which he fought honorably. He possessed the ability to comprehend problems quickly, as well as great gifts of synthesis, and an extraordinarily skillful hand at mastering difficulties, by never backing down from a fight. He was a brave soldier on life's journey, and he only found strength to fight the battles he took up because he was guided by higher motives. He was filled with a boundless love for his Vaterland, his home city, and his profession. No one understood their profession to be a calling in the same higher sense that he did, and then put himself so thoroughly in the service of a mission that had become a passion, the service of free shipping. Navigare necesse est, vivere non necesse est. Ship travel is necessary, life is not. That was his position. His age knows what he, supported by Germany's economic success, made of the Hamburg-America Line. But not only out of it, but also out of it the other lines that worked together with Hamburg-America. Leading colleagues from other countries recognized his superiority and frequently took his advice and suggestions. Restless, ever striving forward, he set his goals ever higher. His own advantage was uninteresting to him. How often did he turn down positions that could have brought him even more power? He always stayed faithful to his original task and to his faith, which he never denied despite, or more probably because of, the hostility he encountered. The way he fought for the position of the Hamburg-America Line, for Germany and for Hamburg's benefit, could only be described as fearless, and he faced every difficulty in the process. He saw the unhappy ending of this war in advance. History will someday tell how he tried to prevent the war with the means at his disposal. But once the war had begun, he was perpetually trying to overcome his concerns about its ending through his confidence in and love for his Vaterland. He put his own powers at the disposal of the nation right after the beginning of the war by helping to organize food for the people. Thanks to his great organizational talents and experience, he was also able to procure a great number of foodstuffs that had not been adequately stockpiled before the war. In general, he built up an organization that will gain its deserved recognition after the war. That's how he wore himself down over the last 4 years. He joined the fight, but was always hopeless. To outsiders, he might sometimes have seemed to have been inconsistent, but he was always loyal to his own basic understanding of things. He was one of the few outspoken critics of the submarine war, but when his warnings were demonstrated to be useless, he did not want to stand on the sidelines and give up on his Vaterland, but forced himself time and again to continue working, although he thought that Germany was on the wrong path. He fearlessly told all of his friends his opinions at all times, without any regard for the position they held. This courageous honesty, which often made enemies for him, was the basis of this man's friendships and the point of departure for the many valuable services of friendships that he rendered to us all. His relationship to the Kaiser was based on the honorable wish to awaken an awareness of economic topics in the appropriate places. Here, too, he was never afraid to share his opinion, though he encountered resistance that he was not able to overcome. He is able to muster all of his forces one last time in preparing the way for the law for the reconstruction of the German commercial fleet. In this work, too, he forced himself to believe in an auspicious ending to the war. Just a few weeks ago, he took on the economic leadership of Hamburg's reconstruction by arguing, in stark contrast to the city government, for free trade. He deployed his entire personality to fight against bureaucratic measures that would, he was convinced, have made it impossible for us to come to terms with the conditions that arose after the war. His motto was, Inserviendo consumer. Nothing made him sadder over the last 4 years of his life than the fact that he was unable to fully sacrifice himself to the service of his profession and his Vaterland. It was not injured vanity, but the impossibility of making his warnings heard that troubled him. More and more he saw that what he had helped build up The old German Reich and its free ship travel was disappearing, and he had to complain of the loss of many true friends. He felt increasingly alone, and his worries about how the future of the German people could be erected on the ruins of the war bore heavily on him. The economic boon times of the last 30 years are unimaginable without Albert Ballin. Among the many helpers who we will miss in the reconstruction of the German Reich, and whose strength we were counting on that task, Albert Ballin's name is first on the list. With his gift of adapting to new circumstances, he would have been a valuable leader, even in this new time, as he was always aligned with those who wanted to work and create. We live in a time of great death. The right to mourn a single individual has nearly been taken from us. Albert Ballin's departure has affected us so deeply and painfully, however, that we wish to keep his picture close in gratitude, despite the tremendous events in Germany. In memory, we wish to hold his powerfully creative force and life-affirming figure alive, spurring us on to new activity and a new time. Thus was Max Warburg's eulogy for his dear friend Albert Ballin on November 12, 1918. In 1909, as a postscript, Albert Ballin was rumored to be offered the position of Chancellor of Germany after the resignation of his friend, Chancellor Bernhard von Bülow. Albert Ballin knew that not only would he have to give up his position at the head of the Hamburg-America Line to accept the position of Chancellor of Germany, but he would also almost certainly have to convert to Christianity. That was something he could not do. Hence the reference in Max Warburg's eulogy to him remaining loyal to his faith, and how many times he had offered positions that would have given him even more power. The flip side of this what if is that if Albert Ballin had become Chancellor of Germany, perhaps the Great War, World War I, the great catastrophe that cost so many millions of lives, may have indeed been averted. In closing, I'd also like to thank my translators for The Last Ships from Hamburg, from which this eulogy is quoted, to Ryan Don, to Peter Kuras, and to Matthias Müller, who were the translators of all these original documents, and also to the members of the Ballin family and to the members of the Warburg family, who granted me access to these archives. This is Stephen Ujifusa, and this is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast.